Welcome to If Not For God, stories of hopelessness that turn to hope. Here is your host, Mike Zwick.
If not for God. Today, Mike has a real treat for you. You know, God has one story, and where you're thinking you've got a lot going on. Well, God has a lot going on, and you're going to find out more about that, what's going on around the world today. You got a special guest, Mike.
We do have a very special guest. It was actually interesting because yesterday I was sitting at the house and I was thinking about. I said something's telling me to do a radio show tomorrow morning because I know we had one coming up or this or that, and something just said. I said, what do I want to talk about? And something just as loud as anything I've ever heard without making a noise said, you need to talk about persecution. And so I ended up talking to my friend Chuck Reich. And I said, Chuck, you probably don't know anybody who knows anything about persecution, but I figured I'd, kind of maybe ask you if you did. And he said, yeah. He said, I know a guy named Todd Nettleton. And Todd has actually been the voice host of the Voice of the Martyrs for the past 5 years. He's been with Voice of the Martyrs for the past 22 years. And what he gets to do on a weekly basis is he gets to sit down with Christians who face persecution a lot. And I've got Todd, he's on over 1,000 radio stations across the country. And without further ado, Todd, what can you tell us about persecution?
You know, I think the first thing for American listeners to understand and American Christians to understand, we have a picture in our mind when you go and sit down with a Christian who maybe has been arrested for their faith, or maybe they've been beaten up because they left Islam and they're now following Jesus Christ. Our picture as American Christians is kind of, hey, this person's going to be pretty depressed. They're probably going to be really discouraged. And, they've been through these terrible experiences. It's good that I could go and cheer them up. And the reality is when you sit down with them, the amazing sense of the joy of the Lord and the presence of the Lord that they have is something that is just mind-boggling to us, because they will talk about, and, we shouldn't be surprised by this. The Bible talks about persecution as a blessing. The Bible talks about the disciples were beaten and they left the council rejoicing that they had been counted worthy to suffer for the name of Christ. That is still happening, and there is still that sense of excitement and joy and rejoicing among our persecuted brothers and sisters.
Absolutely. It was interesting. Before the show started today, I was actually listening to something, and I told you about this before the show, Todd, but I said that there was a lady named Corrie ten Boom. And what she said that before, I think it was World War II, when the Nazis took over, she said the Christian missionaries would always tell people about Jesus and, the good things about Jesus, this and that. She said when persecution and when tough times came, a lot of the Christians actually fell away because the missionaries never actually told them about persecution. Do you think that may be a little bit of the case right here in the United States right now?
It's going to be interesting to see if and when persecution comes to the U.S. church, what that is going to do to the church. One of the very fascinating things to me is the church is growing faster in the Islamic Republic of Iran than it is in the United States of America. The church is growing faster in communist China than it is in the United States of America. Why is that? How do you account for that? And I think one of the things, and as Corrie ten Boom experienced, the church in Iran is not full of any people who are there for the wrong reasons. If you're there to make contacts for your business, or you're there to meet girls, or whatever other reasons why some of us might have gone to church at some points in our life, you don't go if it's going to get you thrown in jail.
Right.
You don't go if it's going to get you beat up or thrown in prison or killed. You do something else. You stay home. So if you have a church that's full of people who are there for the right reasons, they're there to worship Christ. They're there to learn how to tell other people the story of Jesus. They're there to be discipled, to do good works that God has established for each of us to do. When you have a church that's full of those kind of people, of course it's going to grow. It shouldn't surprise us that the church is growing in those places, because those are the kind of people that are in the church. that's a lesson for us as American Christians. If you're there for the wrong reasons and persecution starts, you will find something else to do with your Sundays. But if you're there for the right reasons, it will strengthen you. It will purify the gold, and the church will grow.
Yeah, can you think of maybe one of the stories that, and I know you've interviewed a lot of people, but maybe one story that kind of sticks out in your head where somebody went through a great persecution, but then Jesus was just there through it, and they were able to tell people about it?
One of my favorite stories comes from one of my first visits to China. So this has been probably 15, 16 years ago. But we went and sat down with a lady named Sister Tong, who had just been released from 6 months in prison. She actually hosted a house church meeting in her home. The government came in and raided. They sent all the other people away, but because it was her home and she was the host, they arrested her and put her in prison for 6 months. And so she had just been out of jail for like 3 weeks when we sat down with her. And I'm pretty new at Voice of the Martyrs, and I'm pretty new in this whole area of persecution. And so my first question to her was, Sister Tong, tell me about the prison. And what I'm thinking is, tell me how hard the bed was. Tell me how big the rats were. Tell me how miserable your life was in prison.
Yeah.
And she got this amazing smile on her face, and she said something in Chinese, and the translator said, "Oh, yes, that was a wonderful time." And I was like, I looked at the translator because I thought there is no way that he translated my question correctly, because I asked about prison, and she said that was a wonderful time.
Right.
And he said, no, I asked her about prison. Yes, I asked the question correctly. And yes, that's what she said. She said it was a wonderful time. And I said, well, explain that. And she said, well, let me tell you, those 6 months in prison, Jesus was so close to me. He was right there with me in the cell. That whole 6 months, that was such a special time with Jesus. And she said, you know what else? Some of the other ladies in my cell, when I got there, they didn't know Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
But when I left, they did.
Yeah.
They're now followers of Jesus as well. So she really looked back on that 6 months of prison as, hey, look, I had Christ's presence in a very special, very personal way. I had a ministry opportunity. I got to lead some other people to Christ. So, yeah, that was a wonderful time. For me, as kind of a new guy at VOM, that was an eye-opening conversation, because I really didn't have a theology that could talk about 6 months in prison as a wonderful time, a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
And I had to adjust. I had to understand. And again, it goes back to what the New Testament says, that there is joy in suffering. It is a compliment if Jesus considers you worthy to suffer for him. And there is a closeness that God provides. So that was a learning experience. And when someone asks me about, okay, so tell me about a persecuted Christian, one of the first ones that comes to my mind is Sister Tong, and thinking about 6 months in prison as a wonderful experience.
Absolutely. So just a little bit curious on your background. What do you think led you to Voice of the Martyrs?
I like to say that I've been at Voice of the Martyrs for 22 years. I mean, in fact, it's 22 years this week. But I really think it started in 1982, which goes back a lot farther. But my parents moved our family to Papua New Guinea. My parents were missionaries, and we served for 4 years in Papua New Guinea. I was 12 years old when we left. I was 16 when we came back to America, and that really planted the seeds of missions in my life. It gave me a great love for other people and other countries and other places, and a great love for God's family around the world, and understanding that I can sit down with someone and we don't look anything alike. Our skin is a different color.
Sure. We
speak a different language, but we truly are members of the same family, and the Holy Spirit kind of gives us that bond and that friendship. Those seeds started to be planted during those 4 years in Papua New Guinea, and so I went to college and studied communications. I actually worked as a sports writer for a while. I worked in PR for a Christian college, but the opportunity to come to VOM and help tell the stories of these amazing heroes of the faith was an amazing opportunity. And 22 years later, I still kind of pinch myself that I get to do it, and they actually pay me to do it.
Actually,
so it's a great blessing.
Do you, and I know what's on everybody's minds right now, and I know persecution, we're talking about it, but everybody's talking about in the United States, COVID-19 or coronavirus. How do you think God may be using coronavirus or COVID-19 to maybe get our attention?
I think he is using it to get our attention. And I think one of the things is just knocking us off balance. The things that we're used to, we can't do now. The things that maybe were normal, they're abnormal now. And so knocking us off balance, I think, makes all of us ask hard questions about, well, what's really important to me? What am I living my life for? What am I investing my time and my money and my days and hours? How am I spending that? And I think God can work in that. The other thing is, I think that there is a lot of fear right now in our country and literally around the world. People are afraid of this virus. They're afraid of the sickness. God speaks to fear. The founder of the Voice of the Martyrs was a man named Richard Wurmbrand. He spent 14 years in prison in Romania, and he writes about the day he got arrested. He was reminded that he had been told in the Bible 366 times are the words, "Do not fear," or "Do not be afraid." And he was actually arrested on Leap Day, February 29th, 1948. And so that year there were 366 days, and there were 366 times in the Bible that it said, "Don't be afraid." And so he really addressed that even in those moments after his arrest, God was reminding him, you don't need to be afraid. Do not fear. I think that's a great message for us right now in the midst of this virus.
Absolutely. And not only that, I believe that, when people are afraid, a lot of times when people are down and people are having a tough time, then a lot of times they look up or they're looking for something to cling to. And I think we definitely have that something.
We do, and it's a great time for us to share that because people around us are afraid. If we're not afraid or if we're not consumed by that fear, it makes us different. It makes people want to know, hey, well, what's different about you? Why aren't you afraid? And that's a great opportunity for us to say, here's why I'm not afraid, because I know the one who said, don't be afraid.
All right. It's If Not For God today. We're going to have much more. Todd Nettleton with Voice of the Martyrs. And don't forget, if not for God, come
not
right
for
back.
God.
If not for God.
If you're trying to sell your home and you're sick of your realtor telling you they can't get your price, think Todd Harrison. Call me. To sell your house for more money and less time and with no hassles, call 919-274-5532. Hi, this is Todd Harrison, and this is a great time to find out what your house is worth. Call me at 919-274-5532. Together we can sell your house for more money and less time and with no hassles. The Todd Harrison team is affiliated with Keller Williams Realty.
Welcome back to If Not For God with Mike Zwick and his extremely cool guest that he has today from Voice of the Martyrs, Todd Nettleton.
Yep. And we were actually talking about this over the break, Todd, and we were talking about what are the most persecuted countries in the world? And we started talking about a lot of them. And we said, well, we don't have a 3-hour radio show, so we're going to start off with Afghanistan. So what can you tell me about Voice of the Martyrs? What can you tell us about persecution, Christian persecution right now in Afghanistan?
Well, Afghanistan is an Islamic country. The U.S. and the Taliban have just signed a peace agreement which will give the Taliban more authority and more power. The Taliban are a radical Islamic group. The Taliban position would be that if a Muslim says, I'm not a Muslim anymore, I'm a Christian now, that person should be given a chance to return to Islam, and if they choose not to return to Islam, they should be executed. So that's the situation on the ground in Afghanistan. But here's the good news. There are 34 different provinces in Afghanistan. There are followers of Jesus Christ in every single one of those 34 provinces. So Afghans are being reached through television. They're being reached online and through social media. They are being given the gospel message, and they are choosing to leave Islam behind and to follow Jesus Christ. I just had a conversation on Voice of the Martyrs Radio with John Weaver. He lived in Afghanistan for many years. He is an author. He is a servant of God. One of the things he shared, and I want to share this with our listeners because I think it helps you understand what it's like to follow Christ in Afghanistan. One of the most critical conversations that a new believer will have in Afghanistan is the first time they tell someone, I'm not a Muslim anymore, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ now. Because literally that conversation could get them killed. And really, their neighbors, if they said that to their father and their father killed them, their neighbors and the people around them would say their father did a good thing.
My God.
He addressed this problem in his family. Look at how he took care of that problem. So one of the things John encouraged our listeners to pray about is these new believers in Afghanistan having that first conversation where they say, hey, I'm a Christian. I'm following Isa al-Masih, Jesus Christ, the Messiah. That conversation could get them killed. That conversation could also lead to them having the opportunity to share their testimony and share their faith. But they have to pray about that. They have to sense God leading them. Okay, this is who I want you to tell. This is who I want you to have that conversation with. Hopefully their heart is softened and they're ready to hear that without saying, what? You did what? And so think about that as Americans. You know, if you came to faith in America, that conversation might be a source of embarrassment, depending. It might be a source of somebody might make fun of you or ridicule you. But in Afghanistan, that conversation can get you killed.
Wow.
That first time you say, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ.
Wow. So Afghanistan, I mean, you tell because of this agreement, people can kill you. And you said the Taliban, they'll give you a chance to come back to Islam, and if not, then they can kill you. You had also mentioned over the break as well, Iran.
Iran, I love to say the full name, the Islamic Republic of Iran, but Operation World, the book about the gospel movement around the world, says the fastest growing church in the world is in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran's also a place where the coronavirus has hit hard and hit thousands of people. Thousands of people have died. Here's the good news, and perhaps this is an example for us as American Christians. Iranian Christians looked at the coronavirus as an opportunity to spread the gospel. So they were out in the streets with masks, offering masks to people. They were checking up on their elderly neighbors, saying, hey, are you okay? Do you have everything you need? Do you want me to run to the store for you? And the people of Iran, the Islamic people of Iran, look at this and say, well, wait a minute. How are you so confident? Why are you doing this? Why are you helping other people when we're all hiding and trying to make sure we're going to be okay? Well, let me tell you, it's because I know Jesus Christ, and he loves you. He died for you, and I want to live that out. I want to show his love for you. So they are seeing even the outbreak of this disease as, okay, how can we turn this for good? How can we turn this for the benefit of Christ and his kingdom? And they're living that out in the Islamic Republic of Iran.
So we've got Afghanistan, Iran. You had also mentioned that the church in China is growing by leaps and bounds.
The church in China is growing, but it is heavy, heavy persecution. In the last 2 to 3 years under President Xi Jinping, his goal is to completely subvert the church under communist authority. And he is willing to go to any lengths to make that happen. And so from the national government level, we now see persecution in every part of China. In December, there was a pastor named Wong Yi who was sentenced to 9 years in prison. It is the longest prison sentence we've seen for several years of a pastor inside China. The reality is, and again, the issue is control. The Communist Party wants you to be a communist first and a Christian second, or a Christian after you're a communist. If you say, well, my first loyalty is to Jesus Christ, which is what he calls all of us to say, my first loyalty, I will put this ahead of my comfort, I'll put it ahead of my job, I'll put it ahead of everything else, is my loyalty to Jesus Christ. Well, that is a huge threat to the Communist Party. And they look at the numbers and they say, well, wait a minute, there are more Christians in China than there are members of the Communist Party. If my power base is the party, what am I going to do about this? I have to get this under control. That's what Xi Jinping is saying. That's what he is doing. And we've heard stories of trainers going out from Beijing to local police all over the country, training them on how to persecute Christians, on how to get control of the church. Wow. We've heard stories of teachers asking their students as young as 6, 7, 8 years old, hey, do your parents bow their heads in prayer? How often do they do that? Do they meet with other people and they all pray together? How often do they do that? Where do they do that? Where are those meetings held? They literally are asking children to spy on their own parents in communist China in order, again, to control the church. So this persecution that we're seeing is much greater than we saw 5 years ago. People are saying it is the worst persecution of the church since the Cultural Revolution, going back to the mid-'70s.
And so we've covered China, we've covered Afghanistan, we've covered Iran. A lot of people right now are talking about North Korea. What do you know about that?
North Korea, the description I like to use is North Korea is a prison camp disguised as a country. So everyone in North Korea is oppressed. Everyone is persecuted, but Christians are singled out for the very worst persecution. And the reason for that is the Kim family has set themselves up as gods. Kindergartners are taught when you sit down to eat a meal, you say, thank you, Father Kim Il-sung, for our food. So if you say, well, I don't worship the Kim family, I worship Jesus Christ, it's not just a matter of, hey, we don't do that here, or hey, that's a Western religion. It literally is treason against the government of North Korea, because you're saying the Kim family, the government is not God. They're not our providers. That's treason. And so in North Korea, if you're found to be a believer, not only are you arrested and sent to a prison camp, your children and your parents are also arrested and sent to the camp with you, because they think, hey, if we wipe out 3 generations, we're going to wipe out this so-called stain of Christianity. And so that's why North Korea is always listed at the top of the list of persecuting countries, is because they are so intense against the church. There are some really cool projects that Voice of the Martyrs does to reach into North Korea. One of them is putting Bibles on balloons filled with helium and floating them up over that border and across into North Korea to bring the Bible down into that country.
Wow.
Another project we have is a radio broadcast where all the broadcast is someone reading the scriptures very slowly and deliberately so that people inside North Korea can write down the words that they're hearing.
Well, I know a lot of the listeners today are listening to this and they're saying, well, that's great, and we're glad you guys are doing all this stuff, but there's probably nothing that I could do to get involved. Is there?
There is. That's a great question. First thing you can do, and this is the first thing that persecuted Christians ask us to do as American Christians, is pray for them. And they're not asking that we pray that they won't be persecuted or that they won't suffer. They're asking that we pray that they be faithful to Christ in spite of their suffering. So pray for them. The second thing I encourage people to do is educate yourself so that you can pray better and more knowledgeably. And Voice of the Martyrs sends out a free magazine every month to help people pray effectively. You can sign up for that at persecution.com. You mentioned I host Voice of the Martyrs Radio, which is heard on the radio. It's also a podcast. That's a way to educate yourself to pray more effectively. We have a website called ICommitToPray.com, ICommitToPray.com. Every week we will email you specific prayer requests to help you pray effectively. So, number 1, pray. Number 2, educate yourself so that you can pray more effectively. And then I always tell people number 3 is whatever God lays on your heart to do, because as you're praying, as you're learning more, God's going to open some doors for you to be involved in. Maybe it's writing letters to Christians who are in prison. Maybe it's sponsoring Bibles to be delivered into one of these countries. Maybe it's getting on an airplane and going to one of these countries, when and if we ever get to fly on airplanes again.
Yeah.
But as you're praying, as you're learning more, God's going to open some doors, and then you just have to be obedient to walk through the doors that he opens.
Absolutely. And, I think maybe this time that a lot of us are at home and a lot of us aren't able to work is we have more time to sit and pray and contemplate and think about what we can do to get involved. And I know, Todd, you've been doing this for over 22 years, but it's important not to, as it says in Scripture, not to just be hearers of the word, but to be doers of the word. And so I feel like you've given us some really action steps that we can take. And one more time, the website?
Persecution.com, persecution.com. Thank
you very much. And Robby, I'll let you get the last word.
Well, he had a story. I don't want to miss out on it if he can get it done in 20 seconds. Great way to end the show.
One of the ways that the coronavirus is affecting a lot of our workers around the world is just the inability to travel. And I got word just yesterday from some of our contacts in North Africa, and they've had to end their aid distribution to some of the poor that they're using for outreach. They've had to end their discipleship classes where they were having new Christians meet together for discipleship. But they said the ministry hasn't stopped. And one of the exciting things was they have seen online ministry, traffic to their website, contacts on social media. Those have skyrocketed since their country's been on lockdown. So even in the midst of the virus, they're having this amazing opportunity, and they're seeing a hunger for the gospel and a hunger among people to know more about Christ, even though they're on lockdown, even though they can't do all the stuff that they would say was their normal ministry, they're still seeing these amazing opportunities. So even in the midst of the virus, God is opening doors for the gospel.
That's awesome.
That's an If Not For God story right there.
If Not For God. Thanks a lot, Todd.
Thank you for listening to If Not For God with Mike Zwick. For more shows, subscribe on iTunes to If Not For God. For more information on Mike or to contact him, go to ifnotforgod.life.